The lower right-hand corner, in this slowed-down version of the original sighting, blown up 5 times. Here's the same footage in original format, again slowed down, with the UFO starting at the top left-hand corner and going again into the lower right-hand corner. As with most UFO sightings,
Why has it been kept secret? What are the implications? I will remind you that a very conservative Republican two-term president and five-star general, Dwight Eisenhower, said that we should be careful of the excesses of the military-industrial complex. We now have learned, and you will hear testimony to this effect, that one of his chief concerns were that special access projects within the military and intelligence sector dealing with this subject were escaping the legal constitutional oversight of the American Congress and indeed of the American presidency. He stated this in January of 1961.
In the councils of government, we must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex. The potential for the disastrous rise of misplaced power exists and will persist. We must never let the weight of this combination endanger our liberties or democratic processes. We should take nothing for granted. Only an alert and knowledgeable citizenry can compel the proper meshing of the huge industrial and military machinery of defense with our peaceful methods and goals.
Eisenhower's warning has really come full circle to this date, where we now see extraordinary funds being put into projects and being withheld from the American public, which if released could give us indeed an entirely new and sustainable civilization.
here's a site that we arrive at, and the blast hatch is open. And we're nearing completion of the star observations. We had been to the other 3 monoliths, and I was at the monolith at the next to the hatch. And it was probably about 1:30, and a unidentified flying object came from the north and stopped right over us. I would say it was well, probably about altitude of 300 feet or so, maybe a little higher. It's a little hard to tell in the dark. It was round. It had, I would estimate its diameter at about 50 feet, kind of like a pretty large, you know, like a wingspan of a B-52, something in that range. It's pretty large. It seemed to have pulsating lights going around it, and it had a white light from the center looking down into the silo. There was no wind, there was no noise. It only stayed there maybe 20, 30 seconds at most. And then I just remember, I'm staring up at the stars, right? I'm a pretty keen observer of what's above me here in the celestial sphere up there. And I just said to myself, what if this thing beams us up and takes us off to some distant place and never returned to Earth again? I mean, this is going through my head here while this thing's above me. And then from this dead stop, it shoots off to the east, just like now you see it, now you don't. It just, phew. And so after this UFO departs, I grabbed my instrument and jumped in the truck behind the steering wheel, and off we went. And we weren't about to be there if it came back. We didn't have guards with us because there was no missile. We didn't have a radio because we're not really in contact with the Air Force Base. I don't know any of this other stuff is even going on, to be honest with you. I mean, we're just kind of out there on our own doing these sites and mailing our material back. It was wasn't even aware there was a UFO problem per se. But as it turned out, the night's events weren't totally over with us at that point. As we sped away and on our way back to Conrad, and the Army Corps of Engineers had base rocked all the roads to take the weight of these missiles they were bringing in. And of course, these are new sites, and they took down all the signs to make the roads wider. And I go over the hill and come down, the headlights come down, there's no road there at Teed, you know. And so I tried to make you either went to the right or left. I tried to go to the left towards Conrad, and the truck flipped over, and we ended up upside down. Fortunately, none of us were hurt. We walked probably about 2 hours to the nearby farmhouse, if you call that nearby, and called the Montana Highway Patrol. The farmer drove us back to the accident site, and it was interesting when the highway patrolman arrived, because we told him, you know, how did this occur? He was asking us, and I told him that his dispatch had told him there had been over 20 reports to his office that night in reporting a UFO in the area.
Good afternoon. My name is Jerome Nelson. From 1962 to 1965, I was an Atlas F ICBM Deputy Missile Combat Crew Commander, assigned to the 579th Strategic Missile Squadron in Roswell, New Mexico. Sometime during the winter of 1963 through 1964, while I was on alert duty in the Launch Control Center at Atlas Site 9 west of Roswell, my topside security guard called me on the telephone and reported a bright light that is a fully illuminated round object was hovering silently over the missile silo and shining a light down onto it. I could tell that he was serious, and his voice revealed he was very frightened. After perhaps 5 minutes, the object left the vicinity. Even before it left, I called the Base Command Post at Walker Air Force Base and reported the incident. I was concerned the object would somehow sabotage the missile. I was surprised by the response I received, being told that the command post would take on the unauthorized excursion under advisement. I was never debriefed by my commander or anyone else, which I found quite puzzling and frustrating. Over the next month or so, this type of incident occurred several more times while I was on duty at Site 9. I would estimate the total number as more than 3, but fewer than 10. On each occasion, I would call the command post, but each time my report was met with the same apparent indifference. During each of these incidents I witnessed, the guard would call the Launch Control Center and report the UFO. Several guards were involved over time and were all obviously frightened by the object hovering over the site. Their voices were actually trembling. Because of my duties in the Launch Control Center, I could not go topside and look at the objects myself. Only decades later I learned that at least one missile facility technician, Bob Kaplan, had been ordered to report to the Office of Special Investigations on base and make a report about the similar incident he had witnessed at Site 9 during the period. At the time, this development was kept from me and my missile commander. I do not know whether anyone else was interviewed by the OSI, but I wasn't. That's my report.
They counted down the missile. We heard engine ignition, lift off. We knew the missile was underway. And we were looking down southwest, and the missile popped up through the fog. It was just beautiful. And I hollered, "There it is!" And our guys on our M45 tracking mount with 180-inch lenses on it got it. And the big BU telescope swung over and got it. And we followed the thing, and sure enough, we could see all 3 stages of powered flight as they burned out and dropped away. And then, of course, to our naked eye, all we saw was a smoke trail going off into subspace as it headed off toward its target, which was Eniwetok Island, Eniwetok Atoll. So we whooped and shouted and heard the film wrap off in the BU telescope and figured, well, that was our first big deal and we got it. We sent the film back down to Vandenberg, and I don't know exactly how long it was after the event. It might have been a day or two. I was called into Major Mansman's office at the 1st Strategic Aerospace Division headquarters. And I walked into his office, and they had a screen and a 16mm projector set up. There was a couch, and Major Mansman said, "Sit down," and there were 2 guys, as I recall, 2 guys in gray suits, civilian clothes, which was fairly unusual. Major Mansman said, "Watch this," and turned on the film projector. And I watched the screen, and there was the launch from the day or two before it at Big Sur. It was quite exciting because of the length of the telescope. As the Atlas missile entered the frame, we could see the whole 3rd stage, which has 2 rocket nozzles like this and one in the center, a gimbaled one in the center, filling our frame from about 160 miles. That was pretty exciting optics. We watched that stage burn out, we watched the 2nd stage burn out, we watched the 3rd stage burn out, and into the frame came something else. It flew into the frame like this, and it shot a beam of light at the warhead, which is represented by my thumb here. Now, remember, all this stuff is flying at several thousand miles an hour. So this thing fires a beam of light at the warhead, hits it, and then this thing flies up like this. Meanwhile, we're all going like this, fires another beam of light, goes around like this, we're going like this, fires another beam of light, goes down like this, fires another beam of light, and then flies out the way it came in. And the warhead tumbles out of space. The object, the points of light that we saw, the warhead and so forth, were traveling through subspace about 60 miles straight up. And they were going somewhere in the neighborhood of 11 to 14,000 miles an hour when this thing caught up to them, flew in, flew around them, went like this, and flew back out. Everything was going about between 11 and 14,000 miles an hour that way. Now when the lights came on, Major Mansman turned around and looked at me and said, "Were you guys screwing around up there?" And I said, "No, sir." And he said, "What was that?" And I said, "It looks to me like we got a UFO." Major Mansman, who was a very good reader of film, said that the feeling at the time was that it must have been extraterrestrial. That they assumed that the beam of light that struck the warhead, the dummy warhead, was some sort of plasma beam, because it looked like a plasma beam. He said what happened is this. They took the film and they spooled off the part that had the UFO on it, and they took a pair of scissors and cut it off. They put that on a separate reel, they put it in their briefcase, they handed Major Mansman back the rest of the film and said, "Here, I don't need to remind you, Major Mansman, of the severity of a security breach. We'll consider this incident closed."
People from as far away as Canada report they saw something falling from the sky that night. Those here in Kecksburg say it landed right here, and those who were able to get close to it say it looked just like that.
I seen the streak in the sky, I seen the orange streak in the sky.
A tribute to what some remember from December 9th, 1965.
And we looked down over the hillside because they wouldn't let us down in, and we could see the military walking around down in the woods.
The whole town still talks about it. You can buy souvenirs and hear the locals talk about it at the Kecksburg UFO store. The money raised goes to the local fire department. Firefighters were some of the first there that night. And a 19-year-old Bill Weaver.
It wasn't too long before the Army showed up, and there was the men in the suits, in the plain suits. They were the ones that were in charge.
Some saw a flatbed truck haul the thing away. When reporters asked, the official military reply, "We were never there."
It did happen. It did come down in the backwoods of Kecksburg, and something was taken out. The military was here.
Something obviously happened. Some people apparently didn't want the kids talking about it, and that raises all sorts of questions. Why couldn't it have been discussed? Why couldn't it have been talked about openly? And why couldn't anybody find any more information about what it was?
That afternoon, our principal called a special assembly and told us all not to talk about it.
All I know is the whole school was told off. The headmaster says, "All you kids are nuts. It's a weather balloon. Don't talk about it."
Victor Zakruzny says 2 objects landed in a grassy paddock where a street is now.
All the kids were hanging on the fence there. There's quite a few kids there. It's a high fence, and I got up to the top there, and all you could see is 2 discs, one there and one a bit further away, probably 3 metres apart. I could hear somebody in the background saying, "Stay away, don't jump the fence," and so I said, "Oh bugger, I'm going over the fence." The craft probably would have been about there, and there was another one set back a bit on an angle, probably just about there. There's a few kids walking around there, and I was the only one on this side. I got up to it to want to touch it, and it was, well, you could feel heat about a metre away coming from. It was pretty warm or hot, and within a minute or so, it just, both of them just lifted up at the same time, about this height. And I seeing, oh, that was breathtaking watching that, and then it just gradually lifted up, and then went off towards the pines. I did a rough sketch of it.
Wow, look at that. This is the view from underneath.
That's underneath. There's no seams, no joints, it's just smooth metal. Normally an aircraft has sheet metal, pipe rivets, or all that sort of stuff there. This looked like come out of a mould or something like that, or one smooth piece of metal. It was just incredible.
We are seeing an image of the Agena target vehicle from the Gemini 8 mission, and as you're seeing just above it, captured in a very rare image that has seldom ever been seen, we have these two very defined blue lights sitting in this dark background of space, almost as if to watch the activity that was happening here. Now, this image you're seeing here from the Gemini 12 mission, Jim Lovell and Edwin Aldrin saw at least 4 UFOs outside the spacecraft, and both spacemen said that the objects were not stars, and indeed they were not. And as we zoom in on this image, we see at least 2 of these objects sitting in the background above the Earth, and we will go ahead and zoom in for you. Now, during the Gemini missions on the spacecraft, mounted next to the pilot's seat, was what is known as the VTR, which was used by the astronauts to document any visual observations or things that they would see outside of the spacecraft during each mission, which were then transcribed into, at that time, confidential documents. So we will play you the clip of the UFO along with the audio from that encounter.
Gemini 7 here, you're not your 8. Last clear, 7, go ahead. Confirm you at 10 o'clock high. This is Houston, say again, 7? I said we have a bogey at 10 o'clock high. Roger.
Gemini Control here again. The reference in that conversation was bogey. It was Borman who reported sighting the bogey. This is Gemini Control in Houston at 4 hours, 24 minutes into the
Continued about the bogies.
The crash of Shag Harbour, Canada. On October 4th, 1967, the small town of Shag Harbour observed 4 bright orange lights in the sky. Over 30 witnesses saw a 60-foot-long dome-shaped UFO plummet into the water, creating a bright splash. As the Coast Guard sailed out toward the vessel, it started to submerge, leaving a strange yellow foam in its wake. Fishermen claimed it was like nothing they'd ever seen before. No wreckage was ever found of the UFO, nor were there any reports of planes going missing from any official agencies. The Department of National Defense concluded there was no explainable conclusion for this event.
My name is Dan Willis. I was in the United States Navy. I held a top secret crypto level 14 extra sensitive material handling security clearance. I worked in the code room at the Naval Communications Station in San Francisco. In 1969, I received a priority message from a ship near Alaska that was classified as secret. The ship reported emerging out of the ocean near port bow, a brightly glowing reddish-orange elliptical object, approximately 70 feet in diameter, emerged out of the water, shot into space, traveling at about 7,000 miles per hour. This was tracked on ship's radar and substantiated. Years later, I worked at the Naval Electronic Engineering Center in San Diego for 13 years. The co-worker who I worked with worked at the NORAD facility. When he first started working at the facility, he noticed objects going on the screens that track everything out in space and in the air, objects going off the scale, doing right-angle turns. When he inquired, his older supervisor advised him that, quote, it was just a visit from one of our little friends. He thought this was a little unusual. These statements are true. I'm willing to testify under oath before Congress. Thank you.
3 days and 200,000 miles into the flight, Mission Control did miss the significance of a cryptic message from the astronauts.
Do you have any idea where the F-4B is with respect to us? Stand by.
The crew required information on the current position of the S-4B, the final stage of the rocket which had been jettisoned away 2 days earlier. This short message hid an extraordinary turn of events. Apollo 11 wasn't alone in space.
There was something out there that was close enough to be observed, and what could it be?
Traveling alongside Apollo 11 was a mysterious object, like this one filmed on a later mission. If the object wasn't part of Apollo's rocket, it could be only one thing: a UFO.
Mike decided he thought he could see it in the telescope, and he was able to do that. And when it was in one position, that had a series of ellipses. But when you made it real sharp, it was sort of L-shaped. That didn't tell us very much.
NASA knew very little about the object reported by the Apollo 11 crew. It was obviously an unidentified flying object, but such objects were not uncommon, and the history of even Earth orbit space flights going back over the previous years indicated that several crews saw objects.
Despite having a clear view of the UFO, the crew were wary of reporting it to Mission Control.
Now, obviously, the three of us were not going to blurt out, "Hey, Houston, we got something moving alongside of us, and we don't know what it is. You know, can you tell us what it is?" We weren't about to do that, because we know that those transmissions would be heard by all sorts of people, and who knows what somebody would have demanded that we turn back because of aliens or whatever the reason is. So we didn't do that, but we did decide we just cautiously ask Houston, how far away was the S4B?
Unaware of the drama unfolding in space, Mission Control radioed the position back to Apollo 11.
Apollo 11, Houston, the S4B is about 6,000 nautical miles from you now, over.
And a few moments later, they came back and said something like it was 6,000 miles away because of the maneuver. So we really didn't think we were looking at something that far away. So we decided that after a while of watching it, it was time to go to sleep and not to talk about it anymore until we came back in debriefing.
To this day, whatever it was the crew saw has never been positively identified or officially acknowledged.
People with their habitation, we can keep track. If there's something very important to be developed from the moon, I'm not sure what it is right now, and I sure think we should identify what it is for America to make such gross expenditures again for human habitation on the moon. We can help, we can join with, together we can explore the moon and develop the moon. We should go boldly where man has not gone before. Fly by the comets, visit asteroids, visit the moon of Mars. There's a monolith there, a very unusual structure on this little potato-shaped object that goes around Mars once in 7 hours. When people find out about that, they're going to say, "Who put that there? Who put that there?" Well, the universe put it there. If you choose, God put it there.
Gathered in a schoolyard with about 20 other men, and we saw a bright light appear in the distant western skies, and it got closer and closer, and when it was just above the treetops, it changed color, and then it stayed there for a while, and then it disappeared into the distance. And none of us could ever imagine what it was, and I still don't know what it was.
In 76, you said you'd try and release all information to the public and to scientists about other UFO sightings.
Yes.
Do you think you achieved that?
I'm not sure, but we did release a lot of the information, but I don't know how much was not released.
The 6th of April 1966 started just like any other day in the city of Melbourne. Then something very strange appeared in the sky above the suburb of Westall. It hasn't been explained to this day.
This boy come running in and say, Mr. Greenwood, there's these things in the sky, these things in the sky.
We looked up and we just saw this saucer type thing taking off.
It wasn't a plane, it wasn't a balloon, it was nothing like that.
A lot of the kids took off towards where it seemed to go.
All the students were just running all over the place, hysterical.
Westall High School as a teaching situation ceased.
My girlfriend and I sat on the fence, climbed the fence, the school boundary, and we were crying, thinking it was the end of the world.
This is a mystery story that has, as its setting, a school. And most of the players were school children. They had this extraordinary experience, which they then tried to share with adults. And a lot of them had a lot of trouble doing that. They were disbelieved, almost stigmatized.
I think, like a lot of other people, I just shut up about it because of the ridicule. And it was everybody. You know, you were a kid, you were making it up. So you just be quiet, and in your mind you just think, I know what I saw, and no one's ever going to shake me from that. I know what I saw.
I really felt for them as people who had this incredible experience, and yet they haven't been able to make sense of it. This is the biggest mass UFO sighting in Australia, yet it seems to have been suppressed, deliberately kept out of the public view. Like the witnesses, I want to find out why.
Whatever material was created about this story has simply been buried. And yet, this memory has survived. And it only has to be slightly pricked. And it's like the floodgates open. And all the memories come rushing out.
I was precipitating various chemicals in order to make crystals. And I just happened to be looking out the window, thinking how to fudge my science report. What I saw directly south was something that I'd never seen before.
We were out playing sport on the oval. One of the kids yelled out, look, look up in the sky, you know, it's flying saucers. And I remember we all looked up and it really was a flying saucer. I mean, from what you imagine, a flying saucer, it was a round silver disc. And it seemed to be very low over the school, and I remember kids screaming and running inside.
The student came in, was hysterical, leaned up against a sliding door, screaming, there's a flying saucer in the oval. And of course everybody started to head towards the door, and the teacher said, sit down, it's not recess yet, and a few minutes later the bell went off.
Everyone started moving, like a whole lot of zebras being terrified by crocodiles. I went where the herd went. Barbara Robbins was the chemistry teacher at the time. And she just grabbed a camera and started clicking.
I went into the staff room. Because I knew I wouldn't have a chance to have a cup of tea any other time, I went to get a cup of tea. And then because I was a smoker, and this is something that has stayed with me for 42 years,
yes,
I lit up a cigarette. And so I don't know how much I delayed before I went outside.
Everyone just took off out into the oval. In time to see it lifting off from the oval. It was probably, I don't know, 50 feet or more in the air at that stage.
I see Andrew Greenwood, the science teacher, coming towards me, and he said, did you see it? Did you see it? And he pointed up in the air, and I said, no, see what? I have a very, very clear picture of him, and I remember almost exactly what he said. And he said it was up in the sky, it moved at incredible speeds, it hovered, it seemed to go away, and there seemed to be light planes. He thought Cessnas he thought they were actually checking it out from the Melbourne airport, and they were circling around it.
Sort of stopped dead, and stopped dead in the air, and then it just sort of started descending straight down. And I'd say it got down about halfway up that gum tree or above the goalpost and sat there for a while, and then it just sort of lifted straight up and then just took straight off.
This thing went down behind the trees, then it came up, and it was like it had become aware of these planes coming in, and it just went woof and just left them like they were standing still.
A lot of the kids took off towards where it seemed to go, and it disappeared down behind the trees. So we all got through this fence and ran towards where it had appeared to land.
Tanya and I and this other girl, we were over the fence. Tanya was in the lead, and we ran towards where it was coming down. Tanya! I lost sight of Tanya. She was in front of me.
A couple of girls got there faster than me. I was a bit slow, and they actually passed out. And apparently it did land, because when we got there, there was a great big round patch of like flattened yellow, almost burnt, although I'm a bit sketchy on that. I can't remember if it was really burnt or whether it was just flattened, but it was sort of yellow, and the grass was all flattened in a swirly sort of a pattern.
Before I got there, the disc came back up again, so I stopped chasing it.
We looked up and we just saw this saucer type thing taking off, and it seemed to turn side on and just disappear into thin air.
And what about your friend Tanya?
I believe she did see it on the ground.
She did see it on the ground?
So I was given to believe, yes. But I went back to school, and Tanya went back to school and basically had gone all to pieces. There was definitely an ambulance on the oval, and I was told that she'd been taken away in the ambulance, and that was the last time I ever saw her.
Wow.
She was just gone, and she never came back to school.
That afternoon, our principal called a special assembly and told us all not to talk about it.
All I know is the whole school was told off. The headmaster says, all you kids are nuts, it's a weather balloon, don't talk about it.
I was prepped to tell the students that what they'd seen didn't exist. We weren't allowed to leave the school, at least I wasn't. My job was to walk up and down the corridors and make sure that all students were in their rooms. I was walking back from the West End. There was a confrontation between Mr. Sambleby, Barbara Robbins, and a man I'd never seen before. I thought it was a police uniform, but it was just dark blue. It was demanded that she hand over not the film, but the entire camera.
I was near the gate and the police had arrived.
There were journalists outside. The police are being called in to keep the journalists away.
We were told that we weren't allowed to speak to the media in school grounds. After school finished, there was a TV crew outside the school grounds, so we undertook an interview with them.
Everyone took off onto the oval.
Now, I can't remember whether it was a principal or a school representative that came out and ordered us to go home and the film crew to leave.
And I'd actually been giving an interview to Channel 9, and the policeman actually walked up to them and said, stop filming and you go back into the school ground. Okay, so that's what I did. I was 12 and a half years old.
Because I was a mischievous sort of person, I was always getting into trouble. I had detention for actually appearing on the show, and then I got detention again at a later date after my picture and story was in the Dan Allen Journal. So I didn't go unpunished, but it was worth it.
What the heck was that? I saw high school students.
Something obviously happened. Some people apparently didn't want the kids talking about it, and that raises all sorts of questions. Why couldn't it have been discussed? Why couldn't it have been talked about openly? And why couldn't anybody find any more information about what it was?
I tried to contact some of the teachers, but many have passed away. As far as I know, only the science teacher, Andrew Greenwood, saw the object in the air. Although he's spoken with me privately, he refuses to go on the public record. Several teachers dismissed the whole thing as mass hysteria. The response left students feeling confused and conflicted. Some are still searching for answers.
I want to find some sort of proof that this happened, so we don't keep on, you know, getting called silly people. And you know, no one's ever wanted to know the details before. They just think I'm stupid, and you know, they don't want to know the story. They just, I said, I've seen UFOs or flying saucers, and they say, yeah, sure. What drugs were you on that day? And you know, I was 13 years old. I was at school in the daytime. I wasn't on any drugs.
There is evidence that the American government wanted to stifle debate about UFOs. They set up a committee to objectively investigate UFOs, but a leaked memo revealed that the whole investigation was a sham. The government's most vocal critic was the top atmospheric scientist, Professor James MacDonald.
Why has the government taken this attitude, in your opinion?
As a result of the extremely heavy wave of sightings in 1952, the CIA and Air Force became so concerned over the sheer number of reports that were tying up American intelligence channels that they wanted to get this signal out of the system, asked the Air Force, the CIA asked the Air Force for a debunking policy. The literal wording was to debunk the flying saucers, to decrease public interest in the UFOs. Regulations were promulgated very shortly that made it a crime punishable with, I think it's $10,000 fine and or 10 years in prison to release any information at airbase level on UFOs. And as a result of that, nothing resembling any scientific investigation has been going on in the past 15 years.